four of us, and happily read that question as if it's like a chat thread in the corner of the screen.
Yeah.
Yes, we're all very used to that now. Okay, so hi, welcome to our discussion tonight about somatic practices. I am here to facilitate. They are going to be sharing all the wisdom. We have questions so that we can be all official and kind of focused and feel prepared. But it's a small group. And so they are very welcome. They have a lot of things to share. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask them verbally or in writing. And that way we can be responsive to you and your needs, professionally and personally. And if you don't have questions, and we will start with our six, but we might go on a total tangent. We will see how things go as far as the discussion.
I like tangents. We like the instruction.
Yes.
And so I'm going to ask all of you to introduce yourself, particularly to introduce yourself around sexuality, how sexuality is meaningful to you. You do what feels good for you, but role modeling vulnerability and role modeling genuineness around sexuality is what I will potentially try to do. We'll see what actually falls out of my mouth. So my name is Fredrick Zal. I am kinky, and so therefore that led me to being a kink educator for probably about 15-20 years. And then I decided that I wanted to go more holistic and look at the entire lifespan and beyond certain orientations and modalities of being. So I'm very passionate about bringing sensuality about this, about our bodies, to clients, to students, to others that I'm educating or just chatting with. We have a lot of taboo, we have a lot of concerns about sexuality, and I look forward to a day when people feel more comfortable in their bodies, the range of all people's bodies, and feel validity and joy and pleasure and everything. I'll stop out.
If you want to.
My name is Carlene, and let's see. So I think for me, what sexuality personally, how it's meaningful to me is that it's a place of incredible creativity. And when I realized that like it isn't this static thing that you just do these 5 things and this will happen. It's a lot more. Every time you're with a person, even if it's the same person, you're just co-creating an experience. That felt really exciting to me. That it felt like an opportunity, because I know that can sound very stressful. But to me, it was an opportunity for connection and just a doorway to like kind of bliss. So, yeah.
Ditto to what they said. Resonate with all of that. I'm Cassie Porter, and I'm a somatic sex educator and sexological bodyworker, and also have a master's degree in counseling. But I work outside of the licensure model so that I can provide erotic touch. And I work primarily with sexual trauma and childhood sex abuse. And I also work with sexual empowerment and gender exploration and affirmation. The question around sexuality, like what came up for me is like really kind of a path of healing of like most of my life. That part of me has felt very broken. And for most of my life, I was really disconnected from my body, and my sexuality felt really unhealthy, and I was finding myself in these really unhealthy patterns. And then I found somatic sex education, and I worked with a somatic sex educator, and my body was brought into the process, and like I shed a lifetime of shame. And now I just feel so much more whole in my body, and I think sensuality, sexuality is like, it's not just about sex, it's about like connecting in with life force energy and just being turned on to life. And so, yeah, I'm just really passionate about that and really glad to have landed in that sense of wholeness about that.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here and being curious about our work.
It's super exciting.
Yeah.
So my name is Amy Weissfeld. I am a somatic sex educator, sexological body worker, as Cassie is. I am also a Betty Dodson certified body sex facilitator and orgasm coach, and I teach for the School of Consent, Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent work. So I do a lot of different things, mostly around feeling empowered in our bodies. And in general, I feel like our bodies want to turn towards health and wellness in the same way that a plant wants to turn towards the sun. And so my job is simply to help people try to find the sun so that they can feel more health and wholeness in their body. My own path, my own journey has been a healing journey. It sounds like it's true for all of us up here. And my doorway was body shame. I grew up with a terrible, awful amount of body shame that really saddled me for my first, I'd say, 40 to 42 years of life. It made it really impossible for me to enjoy a beautiful sex life that was offered to me by one of my loving partners. And it was impossible for me to enjoy that because I was constantly spectating. So I was constantly wondering, like, what if he looks up and sees my double chin, or what if he sees my belly, or, and all of that spectating, I was like out here, and so I was not able to be in pleasure. So my life's work is really to help people feel more joy and pleasure in the body.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. One thing I want to add, my pronouns are she, her, and my website is joyfulselflove.com. I do teach 101 as well as workshops.
Thank you. Of course, my pleasure. So, some people might know what somatic education and practice is, some might not. And so, do you have any thoughts about what the value is in somatic education and practice, and how that potentially might integrate into the work that some of the people here might be doing?
I don't want to answer every time. I would like to just jump in when you want.
This question is great, and really, I think that people need to be seen holistically, and their emotional and psychological needs are just one facet of who they are. And so I think that it takes a lot of modalities and different approaches to really support a person. I see lots of people, it's like they have a therapist, they have an acupuncturist, they have a massage therapist. It's like they're really resourcing themselves and supporting themselves in different ways. And so it's like we have this unique kind of facet of working with the body and working with the body through touch, and not just touch, but erotic touch, which is something that's just so core to who we are and so necessary. So I feel like what we offer really just is about supporting the whole person. So
I'll just add on to that. For me, somatic sex education is a body-based approach to sexual health and wellness, just kind of like a little nugget that's easy to remember. And the analogy that I use for people to help them like really sort of get it is, if I break my leg, I'm gonna go to the orthopedic surgeon, and the orthopedic surgeon is gonna fix my leg, right? But once my leg is fixed, I still need to learn how to reuse it. And so I might go to a physical therapist for that. And so I think of somatic sex education as that. It's kind of like PT. It's like learning how to be in the body to enjoy yourself and have like the best, most wholesome sex life that you can possibly have. Two key things that are really important to that for me are knowing that choice creates safety, and knowing that safety, it's impossible to dive into pleasure without safety. So choice begets safety, and then safety begets pleasure. And that is a really important piece about somatic sex education, that it is trauma informed and designed to give the body or the person a lot of choices. Practice with those choices, not just intellectually thinking about those choices.
Yeah, I was remembering that I wanted to say that sometimes it can be kind of like a laboratory where clients can kind of like try on new patterns, new ways of being with their bodies, and so it's just kind of like this safe container where they get to practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's very similar to what I was going to say. I was going to say that I think when very, very much like Amy's analogy, if the body holds trauma, right, and it's not just the brain, intellectualizing about those things isn't really it's only going to get you so far. And so you have to do work with the body in order to move through that and to heal your trauma. So that's, I think, the inherent value there.
When you're speaking about this, you seem to be referring to different clients that are coming to you for assistance and needing to move from a place of disconnection to a place of connection with their own bodies on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And so, are there any particular types of clients? Are there, not to trigger your audience or anything, but are there particular traumas? Are there particular things that you see in society that tends to be the client that is drawn to you, that you find to be helpful, or receiving them as help from your work? And how do you start that approach for them so that they can feel welcome? This idea of accepting them into the space first, so they can then learn from you.
Yeah, I think for me, the clients that come to me most often have sexual trauma or some form of childhood sex abuse. And then also something that I often deal with is early childhood neglect or abuse that's pre-verbal. And so it's kind of interesting because I end up, along with this sexual trauma work, like we end up doing a lot of like attachment repair work through the body. And through touch and presence and working with the body, like that implicit kind of memory comes to the surface. And so I think the second part of your question is like the how. And really, like, what I see with the sexual trauma clients is just coming in. And first of all, I mean, the very first and foremost thing that I do is like form a relationship and form a trusting, safe relationship of like, I'm here to be with you and touch you in exactly the ways that you want to be touched, and I won't touch you in ways that you don't want to be touched. And like affirming a sense of autonomy, and choice and voice in what happens to them. And so that work is actually, it's like, I think sometimes sexological bodywork, they come and we throw them on the table and we touch their genitals right away, and like that's like not how it works. Like sometimes I don't touch genitals until like 5th, 6th session, because there's a lot of like groundwork and just instilling a sense of being connected to autonomy and choice and voice and building that trust. And from there, you know, we build, and, you know, folks just starting to get bolder and asking for what they want and receiving what they want. And then from there, it's like safety and then voice and then like pleasure, right? So that's kind of like the arc I see with sexual trauma clients that I often work with.
The type of clients that I see are pretty similar to the type of clients that Cassie sees. So a lot of childhood sexual trauma, a lot of religious shame, or like shame around sexuality because of religion. That's something that comes up a fair amount. And a lot of folks that, for whatever reason, the body is shutting down for them because they couldn't consent. Like, so the body is revoking consent instead of them revoking consent, like verbally. So the framework that I work through is surrogate partner therapy. And the very similar, like we build a relationship. There are communication, exercises. There are, like, we do relaxation together. Like, we don't even touch each other the first session typically, right? And it takes a pretty long time to even get there. And then when we do, it is touching hands and touching faces. It's it's everything. So every single step, it's extremely explicit what I'm going to do, and then asking them and like waiting for them to like feel into their body and feel like, yes, that feels good to me, and then stopping in the moment when it's not, so that they feel really safe at first, and then eventually move into like empowerment and being able to ask for things that they want.
So you just mentioned attachment theory and healing it from attachment. From potentially, often people think of attachment theory as your childhood, and it's formed, and then you basically suffer the rest of your life based on whatever your attachment from your childhood is. And so, but it sounds like you're saying that that can be worked on as an adult, and that you can heal that. And then also with trauma, that there's this idea of healing as if it's never there, and then there's that idea of being a good bellhop for your baggage, that it doesn't go away, but you recontextualize it. So do those play into your work? Is that in any way relevant to what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think something I want to say about like the attachment work and the early childhood stuff, it's like something I've seen again and again with clients, which has been kind of surprising to me, is that like they kind of grow up through the session because they arrive with a sense of like, I have all this sexual dysfunction, I'm not able to connect, I'm not able to experience intimacy, and most often there's some sort of childhood wound there, and often it's a pre-verbal wound. Often it's like a wound that they can't explicitly remember. And so I use something called neuroaffective touch, and it's a, basically it's a modality that combines touch with like therapy, but also like body workers, massage therapists can incorporate that. And so it's like I start with kind of like tending, if this is present for the client, like tending to that child self. And as those wounds kind of like get healed and there's a sense of safety and autonomy and empowerment, then it's like, okay, now they're an adolescent and they're like, oh, I think I want this, and then it's like, and then they grow up into this like adult of like, yes, I want you to finger my asshole, and like, it's really interesting. It's like that developmental repair that happens. And so, yeah, I think what I found, and it's a big part of my practice, is that early childhood stuff is actually really profound. And then I think in ways that people don't even realize when they're like, oh, I have this sexual problem, it's like most often there's a early developmental piece.
For me, most of my clients just wonder if they're normal. Like, am I normal? It feels like there is more out there for me. And I always say, yeah, you're normal, because guess what? None of us is normal. There's really no such thing as normal. We're all, we're all weird, and we all get to like what we like, and we get to want what we want. And the secret is really to like learn what is it that you want and how to ask for it, and how to hear yes and how to hear no, and what that feels like in your body, right? Like talking about building blocks and what people need help with. What does yes feel like in my body? What does no feel like in my body? Have I given myself permission to know what yes feels like and to know what no feels like? Or am I always operating under these, what feels like obligatory conditions? So that's a really basic building block for my clients, is like, what does yes and no feel like, and am I normal? And laying down guilt and shame is a huge thing, and how to do that.
So as we're talking about, thinking about the potential difference between understanding how to negotiate intellectual consent and knowing how to negotiate somatic touch-based consent, because I would say we're potentially in a touch-starved society, and just for kids, I've been rereading like Harlow's the monkey experiments, like the Terry Cloth monkey experiments in the 1950s. And Harlow was basically showing that it was touch and love that were actually more important than food, and that they could be given food, but without touch and love, that they would starve to death. And that, of course, eventually became the attachment theory stuff for children later on. And so, if we're growing up in a society that's potentially touch-starved, we might learn intellectual consent, but how do we learn the somatic, the not just simply like, yes, you may shake my hand, but shake my hand this way? How do we even relearn that?
I mean, for me, it's teaching people that what I consider to be the ABCs of authentic relating as a human. And that is like, I'll just say again, what does yes feel like in my body? And what I say to people is, there's kind of four main areas of the body that talk to us, and those are the throat, the heart, the belly, and the pelvic bowl or the genitals. So when I say to you, do you want a piece of carrot cake? What comes up in your body? If you're feeling openness in any of those places, if you're feeling warmth, if you're feeling, you know, a bright, shiny color, that's ease, right? That's yes. And if you're feeling tightness, restriction, blackness, coldness, darkness, that's your body saying no. So, you know, learning to tune in, like a lot of times for me, it required taking a sacred pause because I just didn't know. Nobody taught me, like, what am I even feeling for and where? So, you know, somebody might ask me a question, I would have no idea. So like giving myself the permission to take a breath, take that sacred pause. If I have to just pause, you know, get a drink of water, adjust the shade, like buy yourself the time that you need to take a pause and tune in to your own body to know whether you're a yes or a no to something. I mean, that's like the basic, for me, that's the ABCs, the basics of how to authentically touch and get what you want. And yes, we're touch starved, but a lot of people get touch that they don't want, right? A lot of people, you know, your hair might get touched, or your back, or your body in ways that you don't want.
Yeah, and most folks are often, people just endure it, you know, of like, oh, it's not okay to say no, or to be like, oh, actually that doesn't feel good, and we're taught to just kind of behave or like please people, and so the big...
Oh, let great old Aunt Sophia give you a hug.
Yeah.
That's all good, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're taught, to endure unwanted touch.
Yeah, and to override what we're actually feeling about it. Really, I resonate with what you're saying. It's like the foundation of somatic sex education is listening to the body and like learning to recognize what a yes feels like, what a no feels like, what a maybe feels like, and allow that to guide you and to start moving toward like what's juicy, moving away from what's not, and saying no, and just starting to honor that wisdom of the body moment to moment.
Is part of that learning to vocalize instead of suffering in silence, but learning to vocalize if someone's touching your ear, if someone's touching your back? Is that part of what you work on with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yes, saying no, like saying no, that doesn't feel good to me. And being empowered in that no, and unapologetic, right? Of like your no is valid if that's a no for you.
And it's a whole spectrum of response, right? Like there's a no, but there's also like, you know, fuck no. And no feels different in my body if I'm like standing up and stamping my feet than it does if I'm like, I don't think so. Right? Nah, no thank you. Like there's so many different ways of saying no. And the same is true of saying yes, and then obviously maybe.
Now, as you're saying that, I'm imagining almost like a theater student where you're like teaching them like how to act, to physically manifest their no in 20 different ways for different situations.
Exactly. Yeah, it's part of the work.
Yeah, and I tell my clients I celebrate their no, like as we talk about like what the possibilities are and how I might touch them or the kinds of experiences that we might have together, like I tell them like, if you tell me no, I will celebrate that. I'll go, yes, thank you for telling me no. So it's like upheld that's their response.
And because that's the celebration is, hey, good job, you took care of yourself. You honored your boundaries, you honored your limits, right? It's not so much if somebody tells me no rejection of me, as it is, like you're saying, a celebration. Hey, you're honoring yourself in this way. And what does that mean? That means when you tell me yes, I can trust it because I know you know how to say no. So that's really powerful.
Yeah, so I was teaching for Consent Academy for 3 years, and one of the things I always taught was that the no for me is so much sexier than the yes, because if someone gives me a no, I will trust that down the road, if and when a no is needed, that they will tell me a no then. And if I never get a no, I can't trust them.
Yeah, and really that's like a prerequisite for any erotic bodywork. Like I make sure that the client can tell me no before I even touch erotically.
So if a client does what I find to be typical, I'm like, oh yeah, just kind of do whatever. Like, how do you unpack that? How do you challenge it? How do you work into that? Of course.
So we have an exercise, it's erotic therapy that we really like, and it's called May I Will You, and there's somebody here who knows it and also likes it. So the idea is that there are 4 different rounds, as it were, and you ask questions of the client at first, asking like, may I open the window? It can be anything from the outlandish to, you know, something like that you genuinely want to do, something they couldn't do right now. And the first round, they have to say no to everything. and just sit with that, right? And like notice what happens when they say no to something they want to do. Notice what happens when they have to say, because they have to say no, and then of course they're not going to do anything. Second round is saying yes to everything and you don't act on it, right? And then like we process through like what that experience is like. You know, what is your gut feeling sometimes when you have to say yes to something that you don't want to say yes to. And then the third round is you get to say authentically what you feel, but you don't act on it. And so what that does is it creates safety around like saying yes when yes can feel very scary, or even saying no when no can feel very scary. But we're not doing anything, right? So there's like, we're now neutralizing that experience a little bit. And then the final round, you get to say authentically what you want to do. And like, if it's, may I hold your hand? If they say yes, right? And then they actually ask this of us too. So this is always two-way, but then they, you know, we hold hands. And I think it really challenges, like, I mean, even sometimes when I'm doing it with clients, like it definitely like challenges me, especially if they're kind of ornery and they want to like see if they can find something that's gonna, because I've had a few that are like, what are her buttons? Not in a bad way, but just like what's gonna be the thing that's gonna make her uncomfortable because she can't do it, or you know. And you know, it because there's no requirement to act on it for the first 3 like times. What happens is you actually like sit with it and you get to think about it. And kind of on that spectrum of no, there's a lot of like, maybe not now, I get sometimes where like, and people are like, I don't know. It kind of sounds nice, but it also sounds terrifying. So like it just like opens up that space instead of like this need to like, now I said yes and now I'm going to do the thing. It's just sitting there.
Cool. Well, it sounds like in that third step that the first 2 are a little bit more playful. The third, you're stepping towards being genuine, but it's without expectation.
Yeah.
So you're being in your genuine truth, knowing that no action will happen regardless of how you respond genuinely. And then the fourth, it's similar, but action will happen, except you've hopefully reprogrammed by going through the third step, so that even in the fourth step, you still won't have expectation, but they might hold your hand, they might feed you a strawberry, they might do whatever that thing is, which sounds wonderful. Thank you, that's great.
And that's a lot of the work, really, is it's lots of little games like that, right? That you get to kind of sit with and feel into and experience, and it's the embodied experience of that's where the learning is, in that embodied experience. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you just brought up embodied experience, because that leads to our next question. And so there are many words that we tend to like toss out there and people use all the time, but I was wondering if you could maybe define them for what they mean to you and then potentially how they go into the work. So things such as empowerment, things such as pleasure, things such as ritual. How are those meaningful to you? How are they meaningful to your clients? How do you bring those into your work?
It's a really big, broad question.
Number 3 was a very wordy question. I tried to boil it down to just 3 buzzwords.
I was thinking it's like that question. I'm like, so basically, how do we save the world? Like, that's what my question sounds
One orgasm at a time.
Yeah, I think it's like unwinding all of the layers of embedded shame and just the cultural programming and the scripts, and like just peeling back all of that external, those external forces, and just coming back to the wisdom of the body. And I often like encourage my clients or invite them to connect into their animal body, of like, what does your animal body want? And even kind of like embodying of like, how do you experience your animal body? Like, what animal or image comes to you? And I had one client that was like, it's like a baby duck. And I was like, that's amazing. Because she just was like kind of a fledgling and like experiencing her queerness and exploring her queerness, and so we really explored that. And so it's like, wow, what does that baby duck need? And so yeah, just coming back to that primacy, that wisdom that's really been like eroded and clouded by colonization and white supremacy and like all of the, you know, religion and things that have kept us from the wisdom of our bodies.
So I'm curious, and you might want to take a breath or drink water in this. So a lot of the words you use are wonderful, intellectual, some slightly heady words, but like somatically, like this idea of like being a duck, like what is that in a less intellectual way and more of a like embodied way? Like what is being a duck?
Yeah, so it's inviting the client to like embody that duck on the table of like, so we did body work around like that sense of like sort of newness and innocence and like awkwardness, and just letting that all be there, and experiencing like touch as well.
So if I'm hearing you, it's a newborn duck, like not necessarily like having their legs about them, like they might be wobbly, that they potentially, like if they're on the table, that they might teeter, they might not know how to use their wings or their feet, and they might not even know what touch is yet.
Yeah.
And so as you approach them, it might be terrifying, it might be curious, like all those different things potentially.
Yeah, and this particular client, like her kind of struggle was like being really performative in sex and just like showing up to these like heterosexual encounters and just being like the sexy woman who's like faking orgasms, not having them, but just like sort of playing the part of like just a really turned on woman when that's not what she was feeling, and she was more curious about her queerness. And so it's like giving the permission to like not perform, I think is the key of like working with that.
It's definitely, I mean, there's a whole bunch of foreclosure, and they might not know their full self because they never knew they had the permission. Well, you don't need permission because there's no one to give you permission, but they never knew the self-permission to be able to explore something, to look at options, whether it's being queer, whether it's being polyamorous, whether it's being celibate.
I like to ask people to just tune into like what feels good in the body. Notice. You have to notice first that something feels good. You can't feel pleasure unless you notice that something's happening, right? So there's some kind of stimulus that you have to notice. It might be a warm cup of tea in my hand, and I'm feeling the warmth of that cup seep into my hands, right? Oh, I notice there's warmth in my hands. And then I kind of gotta go, this feels really good. And just savor. You have to notice it first, and then savor it. And like you say, give yourself permission to savor. And start out really small. Like sometimes 30 seconds is enough time for somebody to just try to experience pleasure. And then build that over time. And even like your question, Fredrick, about the word pleasure, that sometimes is too much for people. So then I just dial that back. What can you notice anything that feels pleasant in your body? Because something that feels pleasant is less triggering for many people than that word pleasure, because pleasure brings up all kinds of other associations. So it's really, kind of meeting somebody where they are, and it's really basic, really basic building blocks of like, what do I notice? What feels good? And then how do I allow myself to feel that over extended periods of time?
The overwhelming versions of pleasure, do you think that's like Hollywood movie versions of pleasure, or like performative, this is how men, this is how women are supposed to be, that type of thing? Or what, do you have a sense of what the overwhelming pleasure is, where it comes from?
I don't know what it is. I don't think they realize how much, like how so many things can be pleasurable. And it feels like this narrow thing, and they're like, well, I don't experience that, so I don't like, and so it feels like this thing that other people have that I don't get to have.
Yeah.
That's
like
what
a lot
I
of
usually
things that
hear.
they're failing at.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Like, oh, that's not for me.
I'm not normal because I'm
so the word then becomes this like complete turn off to them because they're like, that's just inaccessible to me. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do it because that's kind of the way that we talk about pleasure. And so I just don't know. I want nothing to do with the word. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I had a client with autism who it's like the whole pleasure thing did not work for her. And so what we came up with for language was regular, like most things are regular, and if it was a little bit good, it was above regular. And like that's where we got, and we worked with like recognizing the things that were above regular, and that made a difference for her.
That's so awesome. That makes me feel so good.
Yay, Cassie did it.
I love when you're talking about someone holding a cup of tea and feeling the warmth and doing that for a short amount of time, and maybe like that's the end goal, right? Enjoying like being present in the moment to feel that cup of tea. It doesn't have to be the whole body shaking, head exploding orgasm.
Yeah.
It's being present with that cup of tea.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. That's where it has to start for many of us. And the other thing is, and when we're talking just a little bit about queerness, we live in a, sex negative, sex shaming, patriarchal, heteronormative, culture. And so people see, speaking of what you see in movies, right? They see sort of one kind of sex, and it is typically penis and vagina sex. And that doesn't work for many, many, many bodies. So giving people permission to like, how much pleasure can I feel when somebody just rubs the inside of my left elbow, right? Or what happens when somebody sucks my big toe? Like, whoa, it's explosive. It doesn't have to be genital. There doesn't have to be a penis or a dildo or anything ramming itself into me, right? Like, there's so many other ways to feel pleasure. So giving people specific experiences and specific other ways of thinking of things. Yeah.
I have a question for the moderator. Are we allowed to ask questions at any point?
Yeah.
Okay, you might get to this later, but thank you for the examples you already gave, and I was wondering if you could give one or two more examples of low risk, slow disclosure practices you do with clients.
Totally. Yeah. You want to do that now?
Sure.
The question was, can we give examples of low risk?
Yeah, so
But
if
I'm
I,
just in case.
can I give a really, like a personal quick, okay, so
Yeah.
I do sometimes one-to-one masturbation shows, I guess is the best way to describe it with clients, it's usually men, but I had one who right out the gate, he was very aware that he had attachment and childhood trauma issues. He asked specifically, he described it, I'd never heard this, maybe you have, but he asked to do a mirroring exercise where we would both be dressed similarly, and he asked if wherever he touched himself, I would touch myself. And so this was, he said, his way of feeling seen and also safe so that he could guide the interaction. And he only requested that once and said it was very, very beneficial for him. So I'm going to personally remember that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And isn't that a surrogate partner therapy exercise?
That one is disrobed, but you do stand in front of a mirror and you actually talk about your body from head to toe, addressing its form, feel, and function. Form, how it looks, feel how it feels to you, or feedback you've gotten from that body part, or not that body part, and then function is like how it works, right? So addressing like, the feelings that people have around like disabilities, or like, even just like, I have bad ankles because I sprained them way too many times, things like that. So, but yeah, that's a little bit more, that's usually further down the line.
I think there's, I get the author's name wrong, but I think Adele and Kennedy wrote a book that has this mirror exercise. So one of them is a therapist, one is a surrogate partner, and they wrote a book, I think in '82, which it's like 8 or 12 different exercises, one of which being mirror.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me that this client identifying as having childhood trauma would ask for that, because it's like developmentally when we're learning language, it's like we mirror our mothers, right? Our mother's like, go, smile, and then you smile, right? And so that's a core developmental relational building block. And so, yeah, I feel like it really ties in with my kind of theory around like the growing up and like how those pieces need to be there in order for like full sexual fulfillment. So it's really cool that your client asked for that.
Right, thank you. Yeah, if you had any other examples, you've already given a lot. grateful to hear them. I think this is really useful for people just in their own personal practices too, negotiating.
Oh, do you do touch work at all?
I do.
Okay.
Not organized. Not like you.
Oh, we're organized.
More than me.
Well, it sounds like you have an arc. So like, I think like it's another certain organization. They talk about this idea of an arc, and so maybe that's the organized that you're referring to, is this idea of structuring, which also has a wonderful business model to it, because you're not getting to the genitals in your first meeting, which maybe is someone's goal, right?
Yeah.
You have a few sessions so that you do a lot of learning. And on the business model, you get to charge on multiple sessions, purposely learning skills, of course. But I know that for a long time, I've always done this. Someone comes to me, they want to learn this thing, and I teach them the thing, but I don't do the baseline skills, and I don't create that arc. So people very often can be one and done. Like they come in, they learn the thing, and then they're gone. Versus creating that arc, creating a sense of connection, so that they understand the thing they want to learn is actually part of a larger sexual understanding.
Yeah.
And you're thinking like kind of at the beginning of that arc, right? Like
Yeah.
some trust building, but like low
Right.
stakes type stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do is we do a whole progression of sensate focus. But I like some of my favorite sensate focus exercises are the first 3. The first one is actually I have a little bag of objects, and they have to close their eyes, and I put the object in their hand, and I really encourage them to not try and figure out what it is, but just to notice like the weight, you could smell it too. What does it smell like? What is the experience? What are the angles of it? And then, so we don't even like really, I touch them a little bit because obviously it's hard to like drop something in somebody's hands without like brushing fingertips. And then we do a hand caress, and we literally I spend about 20 minutes touching somebody's hands, just with eyes closed, and I'm touching for my own pleasure. And then the next one is, and then they do the same thing, and then the face caress. So what this does is we kind of keep talking about this, but I don't know if we've really said it, is like you can't experience the mind-blowing orgasm until you've like stripped everything away. And it's like, if I can't feel things, how can I feel those things, right? So I don't know if that's helpful, but
Yeah,
and it's also like really like, it creates this really strong bond like very early on, because I literally asked them, like, can I touch you from your fingertips to just past your elbow, from my fingertips to just past, wrist, to just past my wrist, so like there's like very explicit, like this is what's gonna happen, do I have your consent, and then we're just touching each other, and it's really quiet, and there's not a lot of distraction, and if there is, like sometimes I'll notice like maybe they're getting distracted, and I'll ask them like, I want you to come back to your body, like sink into, what are you feeling? Are you feeling me touch the crevices of like your hands, things like that.
Thanks.
So yeah, no problem.
And then the debrief right up. They can process debrief.
Yes, there's always a debrief process too, where we talk about like, what did you notice? Like, what were things that felt good, things that maybe didn't feel so great, things that were points of curiosity. Yeah.
One of the very first kind of low risk sort of exercises that I do that you can actually do on camera is like essentially inviting somebody to move you further away and to come closer.
Oh.
And so they get to be in control of like, okay, keep going, okay, stop, okay, move over here, stop. And it's so interesting like what comes up in that exercise, and it's different for everyone. And I just tell folks, it's like, you can move me down the hallway, you can turn me around, and then it's like some clients, it's like they feel more comfortable moving around me. And so it just says a lot about where they are relationally while they are in that place of having autonomy and agency around where you are in relation to them.
Awesome.
Curious how this relates to the may I roll you. Do you have to do whatever they ask? Like, do you have to go down the hall? Or are you allowed to be like, actually, no, I'm not going down the hall, or I will go 6 feet down the hall.
Yeah, actually, I tell them that I will joyfully go wherever they direct me. But when it comes to other things, like when it gets into deeper work, I let them know if it's like, that I'll track my boundaries. And if something is a no, that I will tell them so they don't have to track that for me. Because sometimes it's like clients will hesitate, like, oh, I'm worried about you getting tired because you're touching me for a long time. And I affirm to them of like, I'm joyfully here to show up and touch you in exactly the ways that you want, and I'll track myself and my boundaries. So I do say no sometimes, or I'm like, oh, I'm not able to do that, but how about I do this? But with that particular exercise, I tell them, like, I'll do the thing. I will go down the hall. I will turn around, because that is authentically joyful for me.
But it's a good question, because if I'm playing that game and I'm sending somebody away, I tell them if they don't want to keep backing away, even though I'm saying go away, right, non-verbally, I want them to practice saying, you know what, I'm good right here. Even though you're shooing me away, I feel good right here, right? So that's part of the practice is, or if I'm telling them, more likely, I'm telling them to come closer and I'm wanting them, you know, like maybe they're this close and I'm still saying come closer, right? And they might be like, no, I'm close enough, thanks very much. Even though I'm going like this, like what does that feel like for somebody to say keep coming, keep coming, keep coming, and for you to be able to say, you know, no, I'm gonna stop right here, right? Because that's practice of feeling that in your body, feeling no.
I'm just thinking of Groucho Marx, if I'm getting closer, I'll be behind. But when you're just talking about sensate focus, it's interesting because one, you describe sensate focus in a way that's very different than what I often see around asexual serve, that right? So Linda Weiner's version of sensate focus is coming from Master and Johnson, really seems to focus mostly on handwriting. It seems to focus on this very specific set of actions. But it sounds like what you're getting at, which is similar to Weiner's work, is it's about ownership of your desires, your interests, so the other person doesn't have to worry or take ownership for you. That you can trust each other to be mutually and individually responsible.
Yeah, I mean that's huge, because if I'm trying to placate or act in a way that is going to please my partner, and they're doing the same thing, it could potentially end up that both of us are play acting for the benefit of the other person and nobody's getting anything of what they want. So it's a much less juicy connection than it really could be if we were just straight up honest about what we want.
Yeah, and a tool that we have for that, and Amy's like trained, like really trained in, the wheel of consent. Of like, there's something called the 3-minute game where they take turns asking like, how would you like to be touched for your pleasure, and how would you like to touch me for your pleasure? And so then you get to, you know, feel into asking for what you want and having that experience, and then recognizing like who it's for, rather than like, oh, we're just like mashing our bodies together and like I'm not having fun, and like I think you're having fun but I don't know because we're not talking about it. And it's like very explicit around like having the experience that each person wants.
So you just said something which I thought was beautiful and kind of underlined, maybe you could unpack it a little bit more. The idea, we think that you were maybe touching for your own pleasure, but are we? Like, you just said touching for your own pleasure.
Yeah.
And kind of question mark, right? Do we touch for our own pleasure, or do we think we're touching for our own pleasure? Like, how do you work with your clients around that?
Yeah, I think that it's rare, because I think we often touch to please. Of like, we touch how we think people, you know, we want our partners to be touched, and like, it's unique to have a space where it's like, and that's why this space is so important, of like, you get to touch just for your pleasure. Like, you get to explore and be curious. And to, you know, that quadrant is called taking, of like taking for your pleasure. And it does take a little shift, because often like people play that game and then their taking actually becomes serving. It's like, oh, hey, take for your pleasure, and then they start massaging someone's shoulders, and it's like, is that for you or is that for them? And so really getting them to assess, like, is this actually for me, and starting to move toward like what is genuine for them.
So Amy, earlier you were talking about holding the warm cup of tea, the warm beverage, and so audience was asking about ways to practice, ways to explore, and so are there other rituals? I mean, coffee is rather predominant in the Pacific Northwest, and so potentially that's something that someone has every day, and they can be mindful
Yes.
in their cup of coffee. Are there other ways that clients maybe could engage?
I mean, I ask people to engage with all of the senses. I don't care which one it is, but I want it to be something that is felt in the body. So it could be I'm taking a shower in the morning, I'm going to pause and feel the warm water cascading down my shoulders. Same thing. Notice, hey, this feels really good, and then savor. That feels great, right? So I'm not going to worry about the water that I'm wasting that's going down the drain. I'm not going to worry about like, oh, I got to get my kid to school, or I'm running late, or whatever. I'm literally going to take a small little break for myself and savor that. So notice and savor is a great example of that. It could be, feeling the rain on my face, listening to a beautiful piece of music. So anything like that is a great experience. In terms of ritual, I like, Betty Martin has it's basically a touch ritual, but it's called waking up the hands. And it's similar to what Carlene mentioned before, but it's, I literally have this on my calendar for noon every day. I don't always do it, full disclosure, but I really do try to. And basically I set a timer for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 15 minutes, and I simply sit and I touch an object, and it can be anything. It can be the steering wheel in my car, it could be a credit card, it could be my phone, it could be this glass, and I'm simply breathing and noticing what comes up as I touch. And what I find is that when I do this practice, or when my clients do this practice, it makes it much easier for me to open up to pleasure later in other situations, because I've been practicing or training my hands at being actually able to use the wheel of consent quadrant, take pleasure in through the skin. We have sort of forgotten how to take pleasure in through the skin, because as babies, that's how we explore the world, right? We're holding things in our hands, we're putting things in our mouths, and it's not until somebody says to us, oh, don't do that, don't touch that, that's dirty, don't put this or that in your mouth, right? That's gross, that we stop doing those things. And so this little touch ritual or experience kind of gets us back to that. Again, I think of it as a building block, right? But it really does make a difference in my own personal experience in terms of like how easy it is or how long it takes me to open up to pleasure. So it's a beautiful, very simple little experience or ritual.
Yeah, in somatic sex education, we teach people to develop a mindful erotic practice, which is essentially what Amy's talking about, just having a time container where essentially you just move toward what your body wants to move toward and experience pleasure through your senses. And like I tell clients, it's like, even if it's 5 minutes, like if you can commit to that every day at a certain point in your routine, it's like starts to rewire the body toward experiencing pleasure.
I'm so glad you said that. We haven't even talked about that.
Yeah.
Neuroplasticity, right? Rewiring the body. The autonomic nervous system acts in ways that are, sort of have become habitual. And so sometimes if we're used to responding to a sexual overture in a way where we panic or we get anxious or we get nervous, our body just gets used to that, and that becomes the default. So coming back to some of these really simple exercises can help people rewire. And our bodies can rewire and our brains can rewire, not just from negative experiences, which we all know, right? But also from these positive experiences. So that's a lot of what we do.
So you kind of are speaking to performance anxiety, like with people who experience ED or of any sort. Both clitoral.
Often this, when you're, if you're dealing with like autism, right? People have sensory issues, or specifically tickling, right? That way.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I actually was, as she was talking about that, I was thinking about my client with autism, who I started to work with her on moving toward pleasure, and then she quickly was like, ick, I don't like that word, and then we became, we developed regular, above regular, and she did some exploring, and she's just like, I don't want to sit and touch myself, I just don't, and what she arrived at is that for her, the sex that she would enjoy would be really intense sex, like she, had a partner that would fist her, and she liked that because it was interesting. And so honoring that, like in this exploration, you might find that you actually don't resonate with feeling a lot of things or like enjoy all that sensory stimulation. So it was like, for that client, I really just celebrated of like, now you know this about yourself. Like she explored, she tried, she's like, I want to give this pleasure thing a try. And she's like, yeah, I keep doing it and I just don't like it, or it just annoys me. Like she kept using the word, it's annoying. But then she was able to identify what she does like. It's like, oh yeah, I want to have rough sex, I want to be fisted because it's interesting. So celebrating like those different, preferences and truths about people.
And that's the exploration, right? And not feeling like it's choice. It's having choice to figure out what you like and what you don't like.
Also hearing that you're talking about meeting your client where they are, so that no matter where your client is, they are valid, they are full, they are real, they are everything they need to be. You're meeting them and you're creating language, you're creating systems of learning that start where they are in the way they learn and the way they exist.
Yeah, exactly. And to come back to the comment on erectile dysfunction, like I actually say, your penis is working the way it's supposed to, right? When you're nervous, when you're anxious, when you're stressed, you're not in pleasure, and so the blood is not going to flow to that part of the body. And so it's, again, it's taking these baby steps to help people recognize, number one, what can I do with a soft cock? What kind of pleasure is there for me with a soft cock? Why do I need to have a hard cock, right? Like, maybe I don't. And number two, when I start to worry less about what happens, whether I am hard or not hard, like I kind of say, you ride that wave. It's a little bit like surfing. You ride, when the wave is there, you ride it. When it's not, you do something else. So like, what is there? Maybe you like anal play. Maybe you like something, maybe you like spanking. Maybe you like just soft body caresses on your ass. Like, I don't know, whatever it is, you get to experience that. So taking the pressure off of needing to perform or be or like something in particular.
I don't want to take up a lot of space, but since autism came up, as an autistic person who has a lot of autistic clients, and definitely sensory issues for myself and my child, and a lot of my partners are autistic, and because autistic people are all different, what usually comes up and what I've heard you talking about is choice and options and communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, because some autists are pretty nonverbal and others are hyperlexic like me, is just giving them the permission to communicate their needs. Yes. Definitely. And something I tell my autistic clients when we connect, or when they know, or when we share our status or whatever, is that it's awareness is the term that I like to use. So you're very aware of the pressure or the scent or the texture or everything, and so that can be to your advantage or disadvantage, but noticing is definitely important. So they have to bring that up.
Notice and then name. Notice and name. And I mean, you were asking before about pleasure, like just getting used to building a vocabulary about what you feel, right? Like, oh, I feel buzzy in my belly, or I feel heavy, or I feel wooden, or I feel, feathery, or whatever. Like really any adjective, any describing word can be used to describe, to explain how you feel in your body. So it's practice at building that ability to name, building a vocabulary. It could be I'm waiting in line to get a coffee and I'm like, okay, what do I notice in my body? Just literally do a quick little scan and name maybe 3 things that I feel in my body. That's a super easy way to build that capacity.
There's a term I was going to ask you if you could.
Hyperlexic.
What is hyperlexic?
So reading and speaking a lot, or speaking at an early age. Some autists are reading when they're 2 and talking when they're 2, and others are mute until they're 5 or older.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Very cool.
So one of the things I like to, you talked about your alarm and being able to do that thing every day, and so to me that sounds like this idea of either you create date night for yourself, a week in advance, or on a daily basis. But then the possibility that in meeting someone where they are, if they don't have the 5 minutes, or they don't think they have the 5 minutes, that holding the cup of coffee, or maybe they hold the steering wheel of the car while they're driving to work, or they hold the pole on the bus when they're going to work. So there are these different opportunities. So it sounded like people are excited about these possible rituals because of the things they can bring to their clients. Are there any others that come to the top of your mind?
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how I invite some clients to start a pleasure journal. Like, just get a journal that's just for pleasure, and then as they notice throughout the day things that feel good to their body, just writing it down. So then it requires them to, or invites them to pay attention, and then to kind of, and also to document. So it's like, oh, I'm not feeling pleasure. I can look back at the things that are pleasureful.
Awesome.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I invite people to, as one of their homework, like, pieces is like, if you're walking, even if it's getting from point A to point B, and I particularly like walking because it's outside, and but you know, observe the smells, like what does it smell like? What are things that you're noticing, like as far as like with your eyes? What's the temperature feel like? Like, if you're walking and you have, it takes a second to touch a leaf that you're inclined to touch, right? Like take that time and give yourself those, like you can work it in very small ways. And also outdoor doesn't, you know, nature doesn't touch you back. So it's like a really nice way to do that. But you know, you can do it driving as well. Same thing, like breathe deep and like, what do you feel? What does it feel like to sit in the seat? What do you feel the air blowing on you? What does it feel like to hold the steering wheel? Things like that.
So some of the work that well, it sounds like all the work that you're doing with individuals, but you have talked about the idea of the people you're working with that eventually have partnerships. And so how do you approach it? How do you approach you as an individual versus this maybe assumption that your sexuality doesn't exist unless you're in a partnership? How?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's like when folks come to me, it's like building an erotic kind of strength within themselves that they then can move out into the world in an empowered way and then create the relationships that they want and the sex they want. And so I think that it starts with the individual, but then often I have clients who have partners and like maybe they are healing from sexual trauma. And so we do some work together, and then sometimes I might even bring that partner into the process or provide homework or exercises for the client to try with their partner and then sort of report back. And then sometimes I work with couples directly in their, you know, they are there to work on their bond and their intimacy, and so I might just work with them both there.
Yeah, that's true for me too. I also work with couples. However, when I work with couples, I request that they come in individually first, because I found that sometimes people are a little more shut down than what they feel free to say or not say in front of their beloved or in front of their partner initially. So I find it to be super helpful to see the folks individually, separately first. But the Wheel of Consent work is awesome for couple work, and I do a lot of workshops where I'll encourage people to come as a couple. It can be super helpful.
An audience member asked a case study question about desire discrepancy.
At non-penetrative sex, like taking
Yeah.
penetrative sex off the table.
Yeah.
And then there's a tool we have called boxing massage, where basically one partner gets to ask for exactly the kind of touch that they want, and the other person serves them and asks them questions like, would more or less pressure be better? What would make this better? Would faster or slower be better? And the receiver gets to guide in exactly what they want. And my sense is this, you know, woman is crying and her husband's in the shower, she's not getting her needs met. And so she needs a space just for her to ask for what she wants. And so having them take the time to just explore pleasure individually, to serve each other, and to make room for everyone's needs.
And I will do a very short time container as the sort of box of safety. Like, start with just 15 minutes, right? Because what you don't want to get to is the point where somebody is enduring or tolerating, because we're really trying to take the negative experiences away and replace them with only positive experiences. So if the container is too long, sometimes people have a tendency to sort of tip over from, yeah, this is what I really want, to, it's all right, and I asked for it, so I'm just going to sit here, right? People don't feel empowered to change their minds. So having a really short time container for this exercise can be super helpful, especially at the beginning.
it might be worth too, if she does have some kind of sense of what she wants, then I mean, having her write like a list and then having it in front of her, because it can be very nerve-wracking, right, to like remember, you know, to talk to a partner about this and be like, these are the things that I want to try. And again, I think the caveat that like, it's like, give them the exercise of like, take penetrative sex off the table. It's just like, that's not an option for now, right? And we can reintroduce it. Nobody's saying that we can't, but this is like, we need to kind of get back to like just pleasure for pleasure's sake and not doing the chore of sex, right?
And that's beneficial for him also.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's not necessarily enjoying himself either. Yeah, so
and it's over within 2 minutes, and so how fulfilling can it be?
Yeah, just scratching.
it's actually lacking a lot of like there's probably a lot of room for like really connective touch, right? And maybe, you know, like, because you know, with certain partner therapy, we don't touch genitals for a really long time. You might have them start and they can't touch breasts or genitals. Just touch each other 5 minutes, right? And you do not need to touch those areas.
Touch my penis.
Yeah. Yeah, just take it away for a while. It's not really, but take it away for a while, you know? And let them remember what it feels like to connect with each other. Because I also know some of what she's like crying over about is like that complete lack of connection with someone she's partnered with, you know? Like that would be devastating for, I think, most of us, you know?
Thank you.
So I guess that's a simple first question. So the work that you do, is it always with an individual, or do you sometimes do couple or triads, or you're working with more than one person?
Yeah. I do individuals and some couples.
Okay.
Yeah, but mostly individual work.
And is that like say some, I mean, I'm guessing that there's some decision process in there.
There is, yeah. I used to work more with couples, and I was finding that I enjoyed individual work more. So I took it off my website, but every once in a while I'll have a couple approach me, and I'm like, that actually sounds pretty interesting. Like I worked with a couple today. This is probably like their 4th session, and this is the kind of couple work I like to do, where one of them has sexual trauma, and the other one is just trying to navigate and like helping them come to a place of connection, and having the non-traumatized partner sort of understand the trauma responses and not take it personally, and to just create safety for the partner that does have trauma. And so that's the kind of couple work I really like to do.
Circuit partner therapy is not meant for couples. And that is because, and I really like the legacy of it when Masters and Johnson kind of started, they stumbled upon the whole like concept of sensate focus. It was just for couples. And in the 60s, people were like, but there are lots of us that are not partnered and want to have sex. And so that's like the tradition that it came out of. I am not necessarily opposed to working with couples. I haven't successfully, like I've talked with a few, and it's just never quite fit. So that's kind of, it's something that I am willing to do, but it's just not quite right.
I work with couples and I work with individuals, and I do a fair number of workshops as well. Thanks for asking.
And something that's really helpful is like on the past is erotic massage coaching, where you get to guide them in the moment of ways to touch each other, and it's like those moments of like, this is the juiciest job in the world. And like part of the juice for them also is like that witnessing, right? Of like have a witness to their interaction and having guidance in that, and like that's been, those sessions are pretty joyful because they're pleasure based.
You were talking a moment ago about taking certain things off the table, and one of the things I appreciate in some sense of focus work, they'll talk about if someone has orgasm, you have an orgasm, but you're not you just you have an orgasm. It's a matter of fact, and we're still doing whatever we're doing, and the orgasm happened to be the beginning, then we're at the end of that.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, if you're taking things off the table, but someone wants to do the thing, put the thing back on the table, how do you engage that desire for the off the table thing, so that it doesn't become taboo or shameful to have the desire for the thing you're now not supposed to have? I mean, that sounds like no premarital sex in certain ways, right? That you desire what you're not allowed to have.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's always about wanting both people to be in joyful connection, or at least consent, right? So I would never take orgasm off the table, because you're not asking somebody else for that, right? You give yourself permission for that, nobody else does. But when it comes to something like penetrative sex, that might be something to take off the table, because two people may not agree to have that. What I would say in that case is, if you're going to take it off the table, you probably want to say, we're going to do this for this period of time, right? Like we're going to try this for the next 3 weeks. or we're gonna try this for the next, 3 days, or whatever amount of time frame feels right for those two people. And then I would say we're gonna make a particular day or time to discuss having the conversation, right? So people come back into consent around having the conversation about putting that thing back on the table. So that's how we would do it.
So we talked about a number of different terms. We talked about surrogacy. We talked about sexological bodywork. We talked about I don't think we talked about body mapping yet. So is body mapping part of the work that you do? Can you describe what that is?
So I don't know if it's quite your thing, but we at a certain stage later on in the, so we've kind of worked through like just sensate focused touch for pleasure. Then we do introduce concepts around like touching for your own pleasure, but also like connecting with the person and like understanding, because there's pleasure in serving somebody, right? And so being and there's pleasure in observing somebody experiencing pleasure. So we do erotic body mapping. And that is basically you cover the whole body. It takes a while, and you start with laying on their stomach. So you start with the back, and you can try various types of touch. You typically start with hands, but then you can use your mouth, touch your teeth, your heart, your tongue, things like that. And the person who's laying there is giving you a scale of 0, I'm asleep, to 10, I'm currently having an orgasm, and they just kind of let you know like where. And so you can do charts if you really want to get in the weeds. I tend to be much more off the cuff and be like, well, if I don't remember it, like we'll come back to it and it'll be fun. But some people like use like they have body charts and it's front and back and they like run down, and it's a way to kind of see like. So I will give you an example. Is I realized at the very tip of my scapula is a place that actually, if like the tip's left on, causes me orgasm. And I was like, it was in the training, and I had no idea. So it's a really cool way to like access pleasure. Like areas that tend to be neglected that have like really great nerve endings because they can squish our joints. So wrists, elbows, creases of the shoulders, backs of the knees tend to be places that people are like, oh my. And then of course we do that on the front as well. So.
Does there tend to be fluidity in people's body maps over time? Like, do our bodies change on a weekly, daily, or every single year basis?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't remember the name of Meg John Barker's book, but they talked about that in their book, which I can't even, I don't remember what it is. But the idea of, that nothing's static, even with a partner that you're with, right? Like that you may touch them and 5 minutes later, that doesn't feel, or all of a sudden it was like it was neutral, and now it's really exciting. So yeah, I mean and then of course as we age, right, and as like ability changes, our bodies are always changing, like and teaching people that and making it not a source of anxiety, because like people, I think we've really been sold this idea that like sex is like again, do these couple of things and you'll be fine and everybody's gonna feel great, and so teaching them like this is the opportunity, like all of these are opportunities for new connections, for new exploration and new like ecstatic experiences.
Yeah, I also want to say sometimes just like in touching different places and bringing sensation there, like then pleasure starts to form there. And I'm just like thinking about folks with scar tissue. And it's like, I currently have a client who had top surgery and like basically has not had any sensation in his chest. And so we've been doing this extended massage and touch, and just in like 3 weeks, he's reporting like, oh, I'm actually like feeling a little more there and more pleasure. So that's interesting to note, like that when we give attention to the nerve endings and the tissues, they start to wake up and they're like, oh yeah, that feels good, and like you can wake up areas of numbness.
Yeah, super important. Yeah.
I know going through cancer surgery is that my insides were something on my outside, and then I became very aware of things that I don't know feel my intestines.
Oh, wow.
But I suddenly became so hyper aware that I could feel every single texture in that area. And they shut everything, I think stitched all up. But that area, I could still feel in this like hypersensitive way, which sometimes kind of freaks me out. So I'm like, what the oh right here? Because I shouldn't be feeling that. And that's the thing is, I think we wear clothing by and large, and so we deaden our comprehension of the potential of our bodies. Like we feel our face, we feel our hands, but most of our bodies are covered. And so we stop comprehending that we should feel those. Unless we're taking our clothes off to have sex.
And sometimes, like, we intentionally, not cognitively always, but like there's this phrase, you guys might know this phrase of like genital black hole, right? Like it's where because of trauma, you've sort of fled the body, and sometimes it's a particular part of the body, and so you really do. Some bodies really cannot feel anything there because it's not been safe to feel there. So part of this body mapping exercise and genital de-armoring and those sorts of exercises can help bring us back to really being able to start to feel again areas that just simply weren't safe to feel. So that's a benefit of this kind of work, this kind of body work as well. And sometimes there's pain, right? Like anal sex you should not experience pain with any sex. I mean, I'm saying anal sex because that's what I was thinking, but with any sex, you should not be experiencing pain. So if you're experiencing pain with sex, stop doing that thing and try some of these other things we talked about.
Unless you want to experience pain.
Unless you want to experience pain. That's a good point. Absolutely. We're fans.
Yes, yeah, back in the good pants.
An audience member asked a case study question about dissociation.
So that's what I was just going to say. In general, that's because somebody is used to being dissociated, right? So the practice is, how do I come back to being embodied? How do I come back to feeling things? And I come back to that 30-second, 1-minute practice of like feeling a cup of tea or feeling the sun on your face. Come back to something very small that you can feel in your body and just practice that. It's like baby steps, because basically you're learning. It's like learning a foreign language or learning a musical instrument, right? You don't just pick up cello and learn how to play the cello, right? You actually have to practice. You have to learn how to I don't even know what it's called. How to put your fingers across the strings, how to put your fingers on frets, right? Like that's a practice. And so this is the same thing. You're coming back to the body and learning how to play your own body. And I think that there's a lot of benefit sometimes to BDSM, consensual BDSM play, because it forces our attention to be in a particular place, and that can be really beneficial to somebody. But what you're talking about is when somebody requires that, right? And so I come back to making some really tiny, small practice. The other thing that I would recommend is the book on omen. Does anybody remember the name of that? What's the author's name?
It's a pair of people.
It's the book on omen.
Omen, O-M,
If you email me, I can.
Meditation.
I have it, but I can put it offhand.
It's
I'm
a-
not talking about people that choose that in life. I'm talking
Yeah.
about people that come to me because they've had.
Well,
BDSM.
So, right, and so the beauty of this owning practice is, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's clitoral stroking, very light, and there's a very particular container. There's a time container of 15 minutes, there's a particular way of sitting, there's a particular way of stroking. It's extremely light, and it forces you, when you do it over and over and over again, to become used to tuning into, like, what do I feel to my clitoris? And it's definitely very light, and so it requires that embodied tuning. The book I think is called Slow Sex. I can't remember the author's name at the moment.
Yeah, I'd have to get it. So
Owning is
OM
practice.
is short orgasmic meditation, and it came out of the One Take School, which is just south of San Francisco.
And I also want to say something about that. I think what's important is, like, I've had this experience with so many clients where it's like they've had some sort of form of childhood sex abuse, and then they're into really rough play or kink. And what I found, like, is that can be transformative for them if they have empowerment in it. And like what I want to uphold, and I think is really important, what I kind of teach my clients around is, like, when we are sexually abused, it's like the resilience of our body mind creates pleasure out of something that's terrifying or something that's not safe. So this rewiring happens of to survive, someone created pleasure out of something that was harmful. And so what I really think is important in working with clients is just upholding of, like, that was just your body being really resilient. And there's no shame in the fact that you orgasm from, like, something that maybe is disturbing or something that's really rough or something that's really violent. It's like, that was just your resilience in your system. And so taking the shame out of it and then starting to, move to more empowered experiences of BDSM, of, like, having more choice or learning how to enter into it consensually, because I do think BDSM can be very powerful for people to transform, like, oh, I now have autonomy over something that I felt totally out of control with. So I think it's important to, like, just uphold the rightness and the goodness of that person's experience of, like, and not pathologizing of, like, oh, that's not normal. It's like, oh, your body was actually really resilient.
Audience member, case study, closing remarks. Just a reminder, we're recording, and so if there's anything that I need to take out of the recording, let me know. I can take it out of the recording. We have hands with, was it around the recording? Questions? I know how to edit things out, just let me know I need to do that.
Will you take out some of the some of the things I said about my case
Yes,
study?
yeah, just email me or
Okay.
so, yeah. What's your question?
Yeah, I'm really curious about practices you offer to clients around coming back to their bodies when there's a lot of built up struggle with body image and desirability. Since in my mind, that's so much based on, like, relational it's based on, like, how people see you, right? And yeah, I'm really struggling in particular with one client where there's a lot of historical embarrassment and anxiety and shame about what it means to be a person that looks like me. I'm not allowed to feel sexual, I'm not allowed to be seen as sexual, and I'm having a hard time, like, meshing embodied practice with, like, how that is so, I mean, it's, like, inherently relational, and yeah, it based on how you perceive yourself to be perceived. And this is somebody who, you know, has a lot of understanding around societal impact, and like all the systemic forces that shape desirability, attractiveness, and who's allowed to be, according to cultural scripts, like sexual. And I just, what else can I offer her to come back into what it feels like to be in her body and develop comfort with like her body and sexual self. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We have, there's a lot of exercises that we do. I think increasingly we're seeing this across gender. It's really big over the last decade and a half. So we've been coming up with things. So a couple of suggestions that I would offer is the mirror exercise for sure. I would also, we do one called Through the Eyes of an Artist, and it's more of a homework assignment, right? But you would go home and look at you, disrobe and look at yourself and like talk to yourself as if an artist was about to sculpt you, paint you, draw you, etc.
Seems like level 3.0.
Fair, right? And that can be something that, like, because you can like determine the scope and sequence. So like maybe, and honestly, one of the most interesting things that actually came out of my training was we did. I wish we could change the name of it because we call it the slap tap exercise. It sounds like really aggressive, but basically, may I have permission to just touch you lightly?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we would be standing normally, but like I will. So I might touch you from your head to your toe.
You have my consent.
So just like this. And like you can get your eyes open, keep your eyes closed. And one of the things that kind of comes out of this is like the pleasure of like touching a softer body. I don't know if that's, for me, right? That's the thing I'm thinking about is like that I live in an undesirable body, but like how pleasant is it to be touching a body, anybody, right? It's an elderly body that's interested in itself.
You can do
Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it? So the same thing can be said for, so I would actually recommend like what I call auto sensate focus. So touching yourself and purely just explore. So like, if we're not even putting expectation of pleasure on there, but if you stumble on pleasure, that's wonderful, right? But just noticing and I don't know specifically what her body image have, if it's weight, right? Like, people are really soft, like they feel really good to hold and squeeze, right? If it's scars or like they're maybe like you have more facial hair than you want, right? Like that's still a source of like something, it feels good, right? Now obviously that doesn't like address the way it looks, but what it kind of does is it's like, I guess like reframing instead of, because we think so much just about form. What does somebody look like? You have to be like good looking. Well, everybody feels good, right? And so like what feels good on your body to you might be a place to start.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I feel like it's tough, right? Because it's just like so embedded, like that kind of cultural expectation of appearance and beauty, and it's definitely been part of my journey as well. And I think what I have to say about that is just developing eroticism from the inside, right? And like I know that it's like kind of woo-y sounding or big, but it's like touching in with sensuality, like the goodness and beauty and vibrance of your own body, and having more experiences of that. And maybe that's being naked out in nature, or going to hot springs and soaking naked, and being by yourself. Just the things that Carlene was talking about, self-touch, like more and more experiences of feeling that inside, but it's not easy.
I have a question.
Can I just add a little something first?
Yeah, I'm in no rush.
Okay. So there are two resources that I really like and recommend that clients utilize when possible and when they're dealing with body shame. One is Karen Bromfit's movie Embrace, which is on Vimeo. It's fantastic. Second is Sonia Renee Taylor's book, which sounds like it's called Body is Not an Apology, and the workbook is phenomenal. So some of the things that I've gotten from those two resources are, number one, recognizing that we have walked through life and have gotten like these negative images, negative messages that have sort of stuck to us like Velcro. So we have to actively like clear that Velcro off of us, clear those negative thoughts and images and mindsets and ways of being in the world off of us. And then we have to, number two, replace those things with positive messages. So mantras and affirmations can be really helpful. Because I'm a somatic sex therapist, because I'm a somatic sex educator, not a therapist. I specifically focus on how do we get those affirmations and mantras to land in the body. So I typically recommend, if you have a habit of like rubbing lotion into your body nightly, say mantras while you're rubbing lotion into your body. Say those mantras while you're rubbing oil on your body and masturbating. Say those mantras to yourself while you're looking in the mirror and give yourself some sort of touch that feels really juicy. And then the third thing is move your body in ways that feel really good. Like a lot of us think, oh, I need to go to the gym, I need to exercise, I need to do this or that, right, to lose weight. It can be dance, it can be yoga, it can be anything that feels good. But we need to move, but we need to move in ways that feel good.
So this is probably kind of, I don't know if this is really an appropriate question, you and I have already talked about it, but I think you had talked about the person who disassociates but needs to have that real traumatization. So something that I was thinking about was, if you're a person who really wants to overcome like the physiological resistance to a certain kind of touch, let's say touch to the whole vulva area, you want it in your mind, but your body just continues to resist it. Like, what did you do? Like, what kind of exercises you talked about some exercises, I guess for a specific thing to help someone kind of overcome that real strong physiological response.
Well, you're talking about, do you want to go? Sorry, I don't want to take too much
I
time.
just wonder, is this the grief tempting that you brought up beforehand? Is this part of
Sounding
that?
good?
I mean, I think owning is great, yeah. And I think we've recognizing that we get to feel whatever it is that comes up. It's not always about like, where's the pleasure, on the clit, right? Like, what's there is there. And so I think choosing the door marked pleasure is important, because that is a choice. But also knowing that in order to feel pleasure, you have to allow yourself to feel all of the feels. And grief is often a part of that. So if this was my client, I would I'd give a home play of vulva massage. And I would simply say, hand over hand, vulva massage, use a little bit of oil, listen to some soothing music. You're not going for pleasure. You're just noticing what happens, what you feel. You're giving yourself permission to feel grief if it's there, to feel sadness if it's there, to feel pleasure if that's what's there, to feel whatever comes up. And I would simply give a practice of vulva massage and being curious about what comes up.
So maybe like training the body, like you talked about cupping or not cupping, but you were holding something every day at noon, or you just kind of
Waking up
handing
hands,
the body,
waking
like,
up the hands to pleasure with
get
exercise. Yeah, this is more about touching your body in a place that you expect there to be pleasure and want there to be pleasure, but there isn't pleasure there.
Yeah.
So being curious about what is, not requiring it to be something that's not there. And just seeing what shows up and what happens. And I would, again, make that a regular practice. Like, can you do that 3 days a week for 5 minutes, right? And just see what happens and journal, right? Be curious about what happens when I just do this very simple vulva massage exercise. Does it bring pleasure? Is there resistance there? Am I crying? Like, what shows up?
Yeah, okay. So I would want to get that client on the table, and I would want to enter into a dialogue with that part of their body, like whatever part of the body is resistant to touch or kind of has a physiological reaction, like whatever is resisting that is in the body. Because obviously there's an intention or conscious desire to feel something, but the body is saying no. So I would enter in, so essentially, and this is where like this thing I use called neuroaffective touch that I just fucking love, and it's neuroaffective touch.
Thank you.
And one of the skills is body-mind dialogues. And so it's just essentially engaging in a dialogue with the body. And so just creating space for that person's vulva, of like, hello vulva, here you are. And it's like, so what are you noticing there? Like, what does your vulva need? If your vulva had a voice, what would it say? You know, and just like getting into that embedded kind of emotional material that often is, you know, a big part of the equation.
Counseling with our hearts, right? That's what you would say that is. Sorry, Carly.
If like a vulva massage sounds like too much for somebody, some things that I either do or, and again, you could like instruct somebody to do this themselves, is I ask them for permission to just look at their vulva, and it might be like this, or it might be this, right? Because basically what I'm doing is I'm directing some attention there, and then what I might ask is like, may I, so like this is the vulva, right? And I ask like, may I just lay my hand there and just hold it, right? I'm not going to move anything. That might be too much, right? But I'm just going to lay my hand there and I'm going to hold it, and we're going to do that for 2 minutes. And then perhaps like, may I touch like the area like right between your legs and kind of slowly move in. Maybe now, may I touch like your outer labia? You know, may I, and progress from there. They can use a mirror if it's solo. to look, and then they can also just like sit on their hands and just cut and hold for a while. So these things can all be like accommodated for somebody who wants to do it by themselves. But that can be a way to like enter if it just feels like so uncomfortable to like start just touching the blood.
Yeah, super smart. The other thing is, hold 1 second, the other thing is that I think we've alluded to it, haven't explicitly said, which is, like when somebody comes into my studio, and I'm assuming this is true for you guys also, we're not saying like, okay, thanks for coming, Nancy, here's what we're gonna do today, right? We're gonna say, here are some things that might feel good based on your desire to work on having bigger, better orgasms or getting rid of erectile dysfunction or whatever they're coming to see us about, right? And we're gonna say, based on those things, here are 2 or 3 things that could work well for you today. Which of these things feels like the right thing to you in your body right now, right? Whenever, and you guys agree with me, I'm not saying like, here's what we're doing.
Yeah,
Right?
I usually have like
and
a
this is about,
rough outline, and then I ask them like, how does
Yeah.
that feel to you? And like,
yeah,
fortunately, I've been a teacher for a long time, so you could have really was like, okay, this doesn't work. It's like, to hear other things that I can suggest.
yeah, exactly. And so, and that's really us saying to the client, like, you're empowered, you're in charge. In order to feel safe, you have to have some choices, and here are some choices, right?
Yeah.
And it's, again, even just that is practice for how to have better sex in real life.
Do people cry in sessions sometimes?
Oh, it's every day.
Often.
I tell my husband it's like a day unless someone cries. Then I know it's a good job.
I'm very excited that people are warmed up and starting to ask more questions, but I also want to be cognizant of time because I don't know if people need to leave at the top of the hour. We've got about 15 minutes till the top of the hour. So there's at least one more sort of officially kind of question that I'd like to ask. But then of course, if you have time, if you for you have interest, you do what feels good to for you. But I'm curious if there are boundaries, like for instance, a moment ago you're like, oh, I'm looking at another fight. There are boundaries to your practice, there's boundaries to your scope of practice, boundaries to your training, boundaries to licensure and credentials and all those sort of things. And then other people potentially have different boundaries for their practices. And so what are their boundaries for your practice? And then do you refer who relate to those boundaries? And what are the boundaries for other practitioners that potentially could refer to you or collaborate with you or radically with you so that there would be sexual wellness for the community while also respecting those different boundaries?
Yeah, well, somatic sex education and sexological bodywork have ethical codes that are pretty clear, and so there's a lot of kind of professional guidelines, and essentially it's like everything we do is for the service of the client and their well-being and the growth and their pleasure. And my background is in counseling, and I bring a lot of the practices and ethics from that around informed consent and also confidentiality. But I think with like now kind of working outside the licensure model, I see my work with people as non-hierarchical, of like I'm collaborating with them rather than this kind of like expert client sort of relationship. And it's like, I feel like it's different from therapy in that like, I really resonate with this concept of sacred intimacy, of like bringing my humanness into the room and inviting their humanness, and through that real interaction, like all of this magic can happen. And let's see, as far as SSE and sexological bodywork, our touch is generally one way. So it's from practitioner to client. And the exception to that is when working with a wheel of consent, which is like the like practicing like the different quadrants. And so the client might ask like, how would you like to be touched for your pleasure? And so we do that work, but we do it fully clothed. And so when there's more mutual erotic skills that kind of need to be deepened into, then I would refer to someone like Carlene, and I actually have referred to Carlene, of like they go to get to a certain place with me and they're ready for like mutual erotic skills, and then I would refer them. And yeah, and definitely the folks that have been in therapy and maybe have a lot to unpack, I would encourage them to work with a therapist at the same time that they're working with me, and also I would make sure that their mental health was in a place that they're ready for this work, because this work can be really deep and sometimes dysregulating temporarily while stuff comes up and these embodied shifts happen. So that's definitely something that I assess.
There's one piece I was wondering if you unpack a little, because I think it's quite confusing potentially for people who are not doing the work on a daily basis. So you talk about this idea that it is a one-sided experience, and I can't remember if it's Sexological Bodyworkers Code or others, Captain Jeffries book. This idea that you're having a genuine experience with the client, but it's one-sided. And so people talk about transference. They talk about this idea of origin. They talk about like, well, the practitioner can't experience pleasure in the moment. And so could you unpack that? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as one-sided. Like, I wouldn't, because we're very much human in the room with them, having our own boundaries, having our own dislikes, having our own likes, communicating that with clients. And so I think the distinction is it's about the client's pleasure, and it's not about our pleasure. So their pleasure gets centered, and it's not about our experience of pleasure, but like, we are still human, and we are still there in the room with them, and we're still like having our authentic reactions, setting boundaries. Like, I say no to clients. I have clients that, oh, wait, can we do this thing? And it's like, no, that's actually outside my boundaries. And so I bring my realness and my boundaries into that relationship.
So the way that my work works is, so we do two-way touch. At first, it's taking turns of sensate focus, and obviously that evolves into something that's much more fluid towards the end. We can do, we can serve the client up to and including sexuality. And interestingly enough, the thing that people are most uncomfortable with is not that. It is the fact that this is a relationship, and it looks, there's not language on this. I was thinking about this today. There is not language, because what I want to say is it emulates a relationship, but it is an intimate relationship in which I'm in. I am their partner during this time. And there are boundaries within which, like, I am the person who is guiding them through this. And the relationship will end. Actually, part of our code of ethics is, like, you do not, like, this is all in service of the clients. This is not to serve me in any way. I think that's like, and I think that's one of the most powerful parts of starting partner therapy, is that, like, I am in a partnership with this person, and while it is for the goal of, erotic learning, it's still very much, it's a very real relationship, and, like, falling in love is possible and happens a lot. And what's beautiful about that is, like, especially, we have clients who've never been able to enjoy that, right? Who've never, had sex, let alone, like, fallen in love. And we get to teach them how to, love someone and let them go, and, like, how you can do that with grace. And it doesn't have to be a blow up. It doesn't have to be terrible. You can lovingly let someone go, and you can, like, rejoice in, like, what they get to take out into the world. Within that, though, the work that I have been taught in, so what I'm most skilled in is kind of, like, bringing these back to basics. So I do refer out typically for things around, like, kink and BDSM, because it's not necessarily my specialty, and I think I would actually refer to Jess usually for that kind of stuff, because I think that is her area of expertise. And so that's probably the biggest thing, and I guess probably couples sometimes, like, again, not knowing exactly how to navigate that.
Unpack the ending. I definitely, I've seen that creeping into sort of traditional dating life, this idea of sort of negotiating the ending at the beginning of the relationship, because it might or might not end, but just to plan for that. And so we also talk about attachment and love. And so how does that work? Like, I mean, yes, you potentially say that in 3 months it's going to end, but 2 days before that, like, how does that function work? How do you end the relationship while honoring love and their attachment?
So everything involves the input of the client. So I had a therapist once, and she was like, I feel like we're done here. like we might be done. And that's kind of how I approach it. Like, it's like, I feel like we've reached a logical place. Like, how are you feeling right now? Like, is there something? Sometimes they're like, yes, I would like to, step a little bit further into, like, other ways of exploring pleasure that, like, I haven't, and so maybe there's, like, a session or two more, and then, but I'm always asking permission, and then I'm like, okay, so the next time that we see each other, how do you feel about this being, like, our closing session? And, like, I usually kind of prep them with what's going to be involved with that. And, I usually, like, you will get to pick kind of, like, how you want to say goodbye, or what certain exercises you wanted to do again, if you just want to talk, if you want to just hold hands, like, whatever sounds good to you. And I usually, like, will, like, write them a little letter, and, like, get them a little emotional. I will usually write them a little letter with advice, or, like, remember this book, and, like, things like that. And then I do have to remind them that they can't get in touch with me for a few months. I think it's, first, do you remember, is it 3 months, 9 days?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. I'm kind of like
And
about
the
it. So the day and
second
night.
official thing was all thing.
It's an official thing. And I also do coaching that like uses surrogate art therapy, but I don't just do surrogate art therapy. But I adhere to this because I actually really like it, because what it does is it allows, it's me kind of being like, all right, I'm not here anymore as the crutch. I want you to just go and spread your wings and see what happens, and you know, and so yeah, and that's usually how we end.
So, just to clarify, because I others might have misunderstood. So, when a client first comes to you, I was thinking, you're like, okay, you have 6 sessions or 12 sessions, and you said, I think it's not that. That you basically, you're working together to come to a place of equilibrium of some sort. That is either equilibrium of we have tension and can't work together, it's not helping you, or come to a place of equilibrium of you've gotten to a good place and you have the skills to work further on your own or with another partner. You don't need me at least for the next 90 days, but maybe 2 years go back or something like that.
Yeah, so we're doing surrogate partner therapy, and a lot of people have seen the sessions. There are a lot of inaccuracies there, but there's so many. But one of the ones that really stood out was like, she's like, okay, 6 sessions and we're done. And that was kind of something in the early days, but now it's very much like we're here to like get you to your goal. And when you've reached your goal, then we're going to talk about like, is it time to have our visiting session and say goodbye?
Cool. So there's a cover with them that's actually a negotiated ending based on mutual understanding of that equilibrium is.
Yes.
I don't have a lot to add. I mean, my work is similar to Cassie's. It's all consensually based, and touch is typically one direction, if at all. Not every client is touched if they're not desirous of that. And I do have a code of ethics that I adhere to, and it's both the Association of Sexological Bodyworkers and the Somatic Sex Education Association. And it's very clear, both of those things are on my website with links. So I ask clients to review those, and then I have an intake and waiver form that I ask them to sign, and that intake and waiver form asks questions like, are you over 21 years of age, and do you feel like you have enough support in your life to engage in this work, and things of that nature.
So my suggestion, we are at the top of the hour. So at minimum, for us to take a body break, stretch, something, because we've been seeing our entrance for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I know that. And then also that gives you the opportunity, if you want to talk more, you can. And if you want to leave, you can. Or if you want a more socially mingle talk, you can. But if after we take a break, if the 3 of you decide that you want to be sitting down, actually think we can do more, but only after you take a pause.
Yeah, and then sitting in the buttons.
Thank you.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
thank you so much,
Thank you
Fredrick.
so
Thank
much.
you for coming.